After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
This isn't just the story of one man's downfall. It's the story of the collapse of an entire empire that once symbolized the American dream. Elon Musk, the billionaire who promised to change the world, now finds himself on the brink of destruction. What happened? Why are his projects, including Tesla and Starlink, on the brink of extinction? And who is behind what looks like a plan to destroy everything Musk has created?
US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
Today, we'll tell you how Tesla's rapid decline became the catalyst for a global economic storm that has affected not only the automotive industry, but also the entire world political and financial arena. In a matter of weeks, more than $130 billion, 0 cents, evaporated from Musk's empire. We have seen governments, companies, and even his own employees fight, but we still don't fully understand what is really behind it all.
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
The first blows came from Canada. In April 2025, the Canadian government, with surgical precision, cut Tesla off from government subsidies, ending tax breaks for buyers of the company's electric vehicles. It was a harsh move that affected not only the company itself, but also tens of thousands of families who were counting on discounts and subsidies. The expected benefits disappeared overnight, and with them, consumer confidence collapsed. Musk, as always, remained at the forefront, but his words only exacerbated the crisis. "If you don't like volatility, don't buy Tesla," he said on air, as the company's shares began to fall. But this was not just a random drop. It was a demonstration of unbridled power, ready to squeeze every last drop out of the company, using any opportunity available. But that was only the first act. Europe's attack soon followed. European countries, disappointed by Tesla's instability, imposed new tariffs on the company, and even tougher sanctions were imposed on American electric vehicles. Everything Tesla had built in Europe collapsed in a matter of weeks. Loyalty to the American brand gave way to support for European manufacturers, such as Volkswagen, which responded to everything that was happening by conquering the market at an unprecedented speed. In this crisis, Tesla was not simply rejected, it became a symbol of instability and a threat to the economies of countries that had once welcomed it.
With Elon Musk's views on weighing into very much national politics, national elections in Europe, and then on top of that, when you see the backdrop of Tesla upgrading its product line and the impact of them trying to chase more sales at the back end of last year, that means it's short on inventory. It can't necessarily sell as many vehicles or doesn't have as many in stock to sell. So there is that issue there of a confluence of impacts, which means that sales have been falling. Again, the question is how much more that will impact into February as well, given that the back end of last year, in 2024, Tesla sales did slip overall.
But while the situation on the international stage was only getting worse, a real disaster was unfolding within the company itself. As shares continued to fall and competitors seized markets, Tesla workers, including those at the largest factories, began to strike en masse. Protests, rallies, and production shutdowns were just the beginning of what we now call the Gigafactory revolution. But what was behind it all? This was not just a crisis, it was the internal collapse of Musk's empire, linked to bad decisions, volatility, poor management, and perhaps the fact that Musk himself became part of his biggest mistake.
That's a 10. That's a good one.
But all this is only part of what lies behind this greatest fall. Countries, corporations, markets, and ultimately the global economy have all been caught in a trap that Musk built. You'll learn how Canadian and European governments used economic measures to deal a fatal blow to Tesla, and why America itself could find itself at the center of this destructive vortex. Today, we will reveal how the destruction of Tesla was just the beginning of a global reset, and why Musk, once a symbol of hope, has become the man who played a role in the demise of the American dream.
After weeks of whiplash, Trump threatening tariffs, imposing some and walking back others, many Americans are feeling the uncertainty. In Swisher, Iowa, distillery owner Jeff Quint says it's paralyzing.
The bourbon industry is going to be collateral damage in this tariff war. I don't really think there's any way around that.
And he's not alone. Tonight, the majority of Americans, 61%, now say they disapprove of how the president is handling tariffs. 56% say they disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. But the president has dismissed those concerns tonight, saying he has the right to change course.
When the first wave of protests against Tesla began, few could have imagined that it would be the first stone to set the entire global financial market rolling into the abyss. This was not just a conflict between buyers and an electric car manufacturer. It was the beginning of what would soon unfold into a huge political and economic storm. Protests erupted across Canada, mainly due to drastic changes made by the Canadian government to its electric vehicle subsidy program. By announcing the cancellation of tax breaks for Tesla in April 2025, the government effectively signed the company's death warrant in the Canadian market. The $43 million, 0 cents in subsidies that had been prepared were frozen. And buyers who had been counting on this money felt betrayed. Tens of thousands of families who had been saving money for months to buy a car now found themselves trapped. This situation became a catalyst for mass protests that swept across all Canadian provinces.
I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
Local dealers who had previously prided themselves on consistently high sales and an excellent reputation lost their entire customer base overnight. Their stores were empty, and surveillance cameras recorded hundreds of visitors canceling their orders and demanding their money back. In some regions, the protests turned violent, with several large retail outlets damaged and local media reporting more than a dozen cases of violence by angry shoppers. It seemed that Musk's career, known for his public bravery and self-confidence, was in jeopardy. But worst of all, the protests did not end there. Musk, realizing the depth of the problem, did everything he could to save face, but his statements only added fuel to the fire. "If you don't want volatility, don't buy Tesla," he said on live TV on CNBC when asked about the company's falling stock price. It was certainly a strong statement, but its harshness and contempt for his customers only reinforced the discontent. Canada was not the only front. Soon, just a couple of weeks later, Europe entered the fray, and here Tesla faced a much more powerful and well-thought-out blow. In response to growing discontent among the population and governments, European leaders took unprecedented measures that finally knocked the company off its feet. It was a real blow to Tesla, a company that was once considered an icon of innovation. In Germany, France, and Italy, countries where Tesla had previously enjoyed excellent sales, new tax legislation was introduced that sharply increased the prices of the brand's cars. But that was only the beginning.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe.
Tesla was soon excluded from the electric vehicle subsidy program in these countries, which deprived it of the ability to compete with local manufacturers such as Volkswagen, Renault, and Fiat, which not only offered cars at lower prices, but also received subsidies from their governments. Musk, who habitually did not take threats seriously, did not immediately understand how dangerous this move was. He continued to insist that Tesla was a symbol of progress, and even claimed that Europe was too attached to old models. But this did not work. Europe began to reject his brand, and at that point, the loss of loyalty became apparent. But the European counterattack did not stop there. Shortly after the new tariffs on Tesla were introduced, the political situation escalated. European leaders began to openly accuse Musk of threatening the economic stability of their countries. "We support innovation, but not instability," French President Emmanuel Macron said in one of his public speeches, which became not just a statement, but a real manifesto for the whole of Europe. These words sounded like a death sentence for Tesla, which, in the eyes of Europeans, had gone from a symbol of progress to a symbol of American instability and entrepreneurial arrogance. The situation seemed unbearable for the company, but its consequences were far more serious than even the loss of the European market. Within a few weeks, the financial consequences began to affect the American economy. Tesla's share price, previously considered one of the most stable and profitable on the market, began to plummet. Institutional investors who had protected the company during crises and storms finally made a decision. They began selling off shares in huge volume. Their capital protection strategies worked, but they also led to a rapid collapse of the company's entire market value. This caused a wave of panic not only among large investors, but also among ordinary people who had invested in Tesla shares in the hope of long-term profits. Shares began to fall at an unprecedented rate, and companies associated with Tesla also felt the blow. Financial analysts began to talk about a financial disaster that could affect not only one company, but an entire industry and even a country.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10%, when you collect it, is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in.
The company's internal crisis, linked to its political and financial environment, escalated to the limit. Amid rapidly growing pressure from the government and a loss of public support, Musk remained true to his management style, rude and overly confident. His numerous statements on social media only intensified the controversy and irritation, and his answers to journalists' questions became increasingly meaningless and irritable. In response to falling stock prices and growing discontent among employees, Musk continued to emphasize that Tesla should not depend on external factors. However, his words were no longer taken seriously. While Musk continued to battle governments and financial markets, internal processes at the company began to spiral out of control. Employees, long dissatisfied with working conditions and constant delays in payments, began to sabotage production processes. As a result, one of the world's most successful and technologically advanced companies found itself on the brink of collapse. Tensions continued to rise, and the consequences of this crisis would soon turn into a much more serious blow to the global economy. But this was only the first act in a long story that would begin when Musk realized that his empire was already falling and that he had nothing left but shattered dreams. When Tesla came under attack from Europe, Musk remained in his usual mode, believing that his brand was invulnerable. However, in the meantime, the impact of these sanctions was becoming catastrophic for the company. Europe, which once welcomed Tesla as a pioneer in electric mobility, has now declared its complete withdrawal of support for the brand. This was not just a political decision. Since the introduction of new tariffs and Tesla's exclusion from subsidies, Europeans have begun to give preference to local manufacturers en masse. Volkswagen, Renault, and other auto giants took advantage of the new opportunities to lower the prices of their cars and increase their availability with government subsidies. All these measures made Tesla too expensive and unprofitable for European buyers, leading to a decline in Tesla's market share in Europe by more than 40% in a single quarter. European leaders made no secret of their intentions. In Germany, France, and Italy, direct threats were made against Musk and his company. French President Emmanuel Macron publicly stated that France would not support the instability and preference for Tesla, which he said had become a symbol of American instability. In Italy, where Tesla had previously enjoyed enormous popularity among young people and those who believed in the future of clean energy, Musk's decision to continue maneuvering on the global political stage was now viewed critically. In Germany, where Tesla had enjoyed great success, especially with the Model 3, a campaign to promote the Volkswagen ID.4 and Renault Zoe cars began immediately after the sanctions were imposed on the company. With these models becoming more attractive every day against the backdrop of rising prices for American cars,
There's been a lot of on and off, some inconsistency.
There's no inconsistency. I'm not like a block that just, I won't delay. It's called flexibility. It's not called inconsistency. It's called flexibility.
at some point, the protests took on a global scale. In Europe and Canada, where the situation was already tense after the cancellation of subsidies, strikes spread to other industries and the country as a whole. In Germany and France, Tesla was no longer seen as a symbol of the future. Reports emerged that many employees who had previously been proud of their work at the company were now actively looking for new opportunities, including with its main competitors. In the end, Musk, like his company, couldn't hold on. When most of the workers on several continents started striking, disappointed stories started popping up in the media about how Tesla had lost its spirit of innovation and cooperation, and it was all because of one guy, Elon Musk. All this led to the company suffering one of the most serious blows to its reputation in its history in May 2025. Massive strikes, a wave of layoffs and protests not only damaged Tesla's image, but also seriously complicated its operations. Shares continued to fall, and factories came to a standstill. While Musk continued to justify himself in public statements, chaos reigned within the company. The company began to lose its suppliers, employees, and investors. At a time when old partners such as Panasonic and other key battery suppliers began to reduce their deliveries, Tesla found itself in an even more difficult situation. Against the backdrop of these internal upheavals, events began to unfold on the international stage that at one point predicted an even more serious threat to the company. As country after country began to support and sign new agreements with Tesla's competitors, such as Volkswagen and BYD, the prospect of recovery began to seem increasingly remote. In developing countries such as Indonesia, Nigeria, and Latin America, where Tesla had once hoped to strengthen its position, competing companies quickly captured the market. Their cars were cheaper, easier to maintain, and politically safer. The Chinese company, BYD, which was actively expanding in these regions, proved to be a real nightmare for Tesla. With the help of government subsidies and cheap batteries, BYD was able to capture a huge market share and double its production volume. Unlike Tesla, which was unable to cope with political pressure, BYD remained politically neutral and had no problem forming strategic alliances with local governments, which allowed it to bypass the problems Tesla faced. Things were no better in America. While production at Tesla's factories was at a standstill, competitors continued their development, and more consumers opted for more affordable and reliable brands. Musk still couldn't accept reality. He continued to make statements that only generated more media attention. But instead of trying to fix the situation, he became increasingly self-deprecating. By this time, his personal brand had become toxic. It was no longer just Tesla that was suffering from his reputation. His other projects, such as SpaceX and Starlink, began to lose customers and partners. In Europe, Starlink was blocked due to political instability caused by Musk's actions, and governments refused to renew contracts with the company. And just when it seemed that things couldn't get any worse, an event occurred that symbolized the end of the Musk era. The Canadian government decided that it had had enough of supporting the American billionaire and completely severed ties with Tesla. The ban on the export of critical minerals such as lithium and cobalt was the last straw. The cessation of supplies of these materials to the US made it impossible for Tesla to continue production. The company's supply diversification strategies, which Musk presented as a solution, did not work, and Tesla found itself blocked. The company was unable to access the same materials used by its competitors, forcing it to suspend car production and put manufacturing on hold. Having lost the ability to produce cars, deprived of a strategic resource, and in response to its inability to mend relations with employees and partners, Tesla could no longer claim the title of technology leader. Musk, who was once not just a businessman but a symbol of innovation, has now become the embodiment of how ambition and political recklessness can destroy what once seemed invincible.